The guys turned around in admiration as I walked down the hall. Of course, I was the most popular girl in college. I walked over to the ugly shorty, Charlie. Everyone was whispering, and I asked Charlie if he wanted to go out with me. He nodded silently like a doll. And then I blurted out something that made Charlie go white. If you want to date me, I have to be your mom and you have to pretend to be my son. But I explained to this idiot that this was necessary for the competition for the most cohesive family. My friend and I would play a family. The winners would get a cool house. Only mothers with children could participate in the contest, and you, Charlie, is just the right size. But Charlie said he wanted to be my boyfriend, not my son. Alright. My friend Jess will be your mom in the contest, and I will be the team captain. And if we win, we go on a date. I winked at him. Charlie finally gave in. Satisfied, I went back to my dorm. How disgusting it was here. Dirty walls, cockroaches. At night, there were screams of drunken neighbors behind the walls. I couldn't wait to move. Yes, we had almost no money. But despite this, we always had a lot of fashionable clothes. We thought that the main thing was to always look chic. In high school, I was a frump. But in college, I decided to change everything and made friends with the most popular girls. Over time, I even became the head of their company. It remained to get a cool house that would match my status. At the dorm, I was happy to tell my friends that ugly Charlie had agreed for a date with me. The ringleader just joked that she didn't even know which was worse, being the mother of ugly Charlie or his girlfriend. Chatterbox Rachel immediately started giggling. Only the wallflower Brittany asked if I really would go on a date with the loser Charlie and sacrifice my popularity. I winced. Of course not. I was just going to use him to get us out of here, and then I would dump Charlie. The ringleader just had a lawyer friend who forged our documents. And within a couple of days, we were all sisters on ID cards, and Charlie was Jess's son. It was the day of the competition, and we took Charlie to the park where the competition was taking place. But when the host saw us, he was confused. Do you have 4 moms in the team? The girls were nervous, but then I showed the host the rules. It said that any relatives could participate in the contest, and Charlie was actually our nephew, and with a sigh, he approved of our participation. Inspired, we went to the clearing, where other families had already gathered. There were some old folks, not our rivals. The host announced the start of the first test. We would be taken to the wild forest, and we would need to be the first to reach the finish line, guided by the map. After all, the family is unity in all conditions, the host concluded. What a trash! It was dangerous out there. No one warned us about this. But you do a lot of crazy things for a beautiful life. The driver took us into the wilderness, gave us maps, and we were left alone with the wilderness. Just me, the girls, and ugly Charlie. And how terrible was this nature? The heels sank into the loose earth, and the dress clung to the branches. Besides, I don't know anything about the map, but I couldn't lose face in front of my friends. I had been winning their love for too long. It was getting dark when Charlie came up to me and picked some fresh berries for me. A true knight in shining armor. Charlie happily said that he would surprise me even more on our date. Ugh, funny. By nightfall, the forest became quite creepy, and I thought we got lost. Our mother, the ringleader Jess, started shouting that I was leading everyone the wrong way. Why on earth would she argue with me? But Jess took the map away from me and told everyone to follow her. Wait, we're going the other way! But the girls went farther and farther away. Only Charlie and the wallflower Brittany stayed with me. I was so grateful to them. But suddenly Brittany took off and tried to catch up with the girls. Don't even think about running away. Grabbing her hand, I threatened to keep her out of the house if she didn't obey my orders. But Brittany blurted out that she didn't expect me to behave like this and that she would immediately tell the host that we were a fake family. After that, she abruptly broke free and ran deep into the night forest. But just a minute later, we heard Brittany plop to the ground, apparently tripping over a snag. Charlie and I immediately ran to her. Brittany tearfully begged me to forgive her and help her. I think she hurt her leg. I didn't want to see this two-faced stinker, but I didn't want to leave her here to die. So, Charlie and I helped her to her feet. While Brittany was wailing, I was desperate. Where do we go without a map? I was beginning to shiver when Charlie took my hand and looked up at the starry sky. This was not the time for romance. But Charlie said he'd find us a way through the stars. What nonsense! He just wanted to hit on me. but there were no other options, so Brittany and I followed Charlie. Brittany was leaning on him, and it seemed that we were going in the right direction. The forest was gradually becoming thinner, but I couldn't forget about Jess and Rachel. If they reached the finish line first, they would stop considering me their leader, and I would become a loser again. After a few more kilometers, the lights of the finish line appeared in the distance. We sped up and were there in a couple of minutes. But where were Jess and Rachel? They were nowhere to be found. Yes, we were the first. Ugly Charlie found the shortest way. Maybe he was not as much of a loser as I thought. It took the girls an hour to get out of the woods, and then other families showed. The girls were furious. How could have I come before them? Have you forgotten who's in charge here? You should have listened to me. But the referee announced that he was finishing our team for coming separately. After all, the main condition was a close-knit team. As a result, despite the fact that we came first, we were given a minimum score and we could have been kicked out. Oh no, but what about the house? The girls got really angry and blamed me. If I hadn't been stubborn and we'd followed them, we'd have finished together. And then the chatterbox Rachel said that they needed a new normal captain, and I should be kicked out. How so? But the ringleader Jess haughtily remarked that according to the documents, she was Charlie's mother, so she would become the leader. Rachel nodded and even the wallflower Brittany supported Jess, even though I helped her. I almost cried in frustration, but at the moment, Charlie said he was voting for me. Jess was about to say something sarcastic, but the host came up and announced the next challenge: to rescue the team captain from a cave full of snakes and spiders. To do this, we had to find a key inside and open the lock on the chain that would bind the captain. I grinned. How lucky! After all, our new leader Jess was scared to death of snakes. I would easily prove myself in the challenge, and the girls would choose me as the leader again. The host led the trembling Jess into the cave, and at the signal, we followed. I went in and almost fainted. The whole cave was crawling with vile reptiles, but I was comforted by Charlie. He was always there, pushing the snakes and spiders away from me. Thank you, Charlie, for helping me out again. But snakes were already closing in the chain chest. She almost cried. For a second, I felt sorry for her. The contest was a contest, but she needed help. But the key to the chain was nowhere to be found. Charlie and I had searched every corner of the cave, and then I saw something flash in the chatterbox Rachel's hand. I ran to her. Quickly, I had to free Jess, but Rachel didn't move. What's happening? Then Rachel suddenly grinned maliciously. She had always hated Jess and would not give me the key, and she added that none of us could be in charge. But Rachel herself was a great leader. What a stinker! Then I heard Jess scream, and I turned to see a huge snake crawling towards her. Oh no! I snatched the key from Rachel at the last moment. I was about to run to poor Jess when Rachel pushed me. The key slipped out of my hand and flew straight into the spider's nest. Oh no, it's all gone. But then I saw Charlie, in a desperate leap, grab the key right over the spider's legs. I admired Charlie's courage. He didn't hesitate for a second. Then he deftly pushed the snake away from Jess and quickly opened the lock on the chains. Thank God, we all ran out of the cave. And then Jess blamed me for almost getting herself killed because of me. She said I was the one who tried to throw away the key. But that was not true. Brittany also started shouting that I was the one who was stopping the chatterbox Rachel from helping Jess. But Charlie stood up for me again. He indignantly said that it was the opposite. He saw it. But of course, Jess didn't believe him. All she said was that she was excluding me from the team and that I didn't belong in their company at all. Then she turned to Charlie and told him that I wasn't going on a date with him, and also that I thought he was a freak, and I just used him to participate in this contest. There was a heavy silence. Charlie gave me a sad look and said he thought so. Beauties don't meet monsters in real life. After that, he turned around and walked off into the distance. Charlie, stop! I shouted. Let me explain everything. I was barely holding back my tears. After all, he was the only one who supported me all this time, unlike these pseudo-friends who only thought about how to sting each other, like real snakes. At this moment, the host came up to us with congratulations. We completed the task faster than anyone. But where is your son? He asked. I wiped my eyes and replied irritably, what son? Damn, he was speaking about Charlie. I almost set us up and immediately came to my senses and lied that his father had already picked him up and taken him home. But it seemed that the host figured out everything. He said that we were breaking the rules again and were disqualified because of the incomplete composition. I froze in silence. It was all over. Now we lost the house too. I covered my face with my hands and cried. The contest made it clear that all my friends were fake. And I also realized that Charlie was a sincere and wonderful person. I decided to apologize to him, and the next day, I found him at the college. I confessed to Charlie that I had behaved terribly and had not noticed his concern and sincerity at all. Can we go on a friendly date after all? I finished. Everyone stared at us and whispered, but I didn't care. Charlie was slow to answer, and I was worried that he wouldn't forgive me. But then he smiled and nodded cautiously. I was so happy that I didn't even notice how I hugged him in front of everyone. After that, there were rumors that I was going on dates with loser Charlie. I quickly lost popularity, and my former friends completely avoided me. But I didn't care. During the competition, I realized that popularity was not the main thing. It is important that you are simply loved without any conditions. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you. We crept into my room by the fire escape so that we wouldn't be seen. Chuck was about to kiss me when suddenly, gosh, the footsteps. These are them. I told Chuck to hide, but he hesitated. My parents will kill you if they find you here with me. I blurted out and shoved Chuck into the closet, and a second later, my parents came in. Did they really hear us? I was afraid. My parents stood in the doorway and said nothing. My dad sat down next to me, took off his glasses, and finally said, "We've decided to adopt a child." What the? Are they crazy? I was totally against coddling a baby, but I didn't say anything out loud because I had to get them out of the room because Chuck was still in my closet. Well, yeah. Sure, since you've decided. I don't mind, I said quickly, trying to drown out the noise from the closet. Now can I, change my clothes? My parents were surprised at the urgency, and my father went out to the closet and suspiciously looked at it, and they left the room. We almost got burned. I said and let Chuck out. This should be celebrated. He winked, pulling a bottle from his pocket. Wow, at that moment, my father came back. He had forgotten his glasses. There was a scandal. Get out, you brat! Dad yelled, dragging Chuck out of the room by the scruff of the neck. I ran after them into the hallway, begging my dad not to touch my boyfriend. But my father wouldn't let up. No more going outs. You got it? Then Chuck broke free, smashed the window with something, and jumped out into the street. What a crazy guy he is. That's why I fell in love with him. My mother was calming my father down and said that I didn't think of his weak heart. They made me go back to my room and my father locked the door. In tears, I called Chuck. He was already hanging out at some party. I apologized for my father and cried that I was now under house arrest. And soon, there will be another child here, and my life will become unbearable. I want freedom. I want to be with you. I asked Chuck to help me escape, but he said it was a bad idea. My parents would turn the whole city upside down to find me. It's lousy when you have no family. Chuck continued, I'd like to be adopted. What do you mean? I was taken aback. And then Chuck said that he was from the orphan home. Gosh, I didn't know that. He's lucky. Nobody controls him. Wait, what if my parents adopt him? Then he will be able to hang out in my room and it won't arouse suspicion. Chuck was worried that my father would recognize him and get in trouble. We decided that we would change his haircut, wash up the emo coloring, and get dressed neatly. My parents would love him. The day of the trip to the orphan home came. I asked my parents to go there with them and found out which boy they chose. Everything went according to plan. I'd met with Chuck at the orphanage, and we'd gotten rid of the kid for a while. Chuck had promised to take him to a biker race if my parents didn't see him. Chuck was unrecognizable. He played a whole performance in front of my parents. He told them how he likes to fix cars and is fond of homemade pastries. He even baked cookies himself. My mother was delighted with him, but my father was still doubtful. In addition, they were worried about the 10-year-old boy they had previously seen. After all, they were thinking about him for so long. We went to look for him in the yard, and then my father was attacked by a dog. Chuck instantly reacted and drove it away. Wow. I hinted to my dad that a 16-year-old boy is a much better option, and there's less fuss with him and much more help. In the end, my parents agreed, and a week later, Chuck could leave with us. When we got home, Chuck moved into the room next to mine. Now we will be together all the time. The first day, I was waiting for him after school, but he didn't come. As it turned out, my parents had already enrolled him in the sports section. Wow. And the next night, he was busy doing his homework. I was looking forward to the weekend, but Chuck spent it helping my parents around the house. I couldn't believe my eyes. Where was that freaky rebel I fell in love with? He even studied better than I did. Chuck made excuses saying he was interested in a lot of things and it was difficult to do everything in time. Then I asked my father to reduce his load, but he ignored me. In the end, Mom and Dad spent days talking to Chuck. Parents seem to have forgotten that they have their own daughter. They didn't even care how I dressed or what time I got home. And Chuck continued to behave like an obedient son. We didn't go out together at all. I was hoping things would get better after the night of the rock concert. The concert was announced a month ago, and the teenagers weren't allowed in. But Chuck promised to arrange it. We agreed to meet at the entrance, but I ended up freaking outside for hours, and he never came. When I got home, Chuck said that he and my father had an urgent business in the garage. He seems to have gotten used to the good boy role and forgotten that he's here for me. I have to show him how easily he can lose my parents' favor. While he was in class, I made a mess of his room, and then I put cigarettes pack in his jacket. I spent a whole evening waiting for it to be found. A day later, I broke Dad's screwdriver in the garage and left Chuck's cap on it. I was hoping that after this, my parents would cool off and Chuck would think more of me. But in the end, even my father reacted calmly to all that, saying that the guy needs time to adapt. But Chuck was really mad at me. Why are you setting me up? He asked me once. What else should I do? I said he was my boyfriend, not my boring parents' perfect son. But Chuck said I had a great family and I was just being selfish. Oh, really? Then I'm gonna tell them that you're actually a ragamuffin who used them. I shouted and ran to the door. Chuck turned pale and grabbing my hand said, "You wouldn't dare." We'll see. I broke away and ran into the living room to my parents. I blurted it out to them right away. Chuck was only pretending to be a good boy, and that he was the boy my parents saw in the closet that day. My father was enraged instantly. He yelled that I had shamelessly deceived them, and then Dad suddenly froze. He swayed, croaked something, and started to fall, holding his heart. Oh my God! From shock, my mother and I did not know what to do, and only Chuck didn't lose his head. He yelled Mom to call 911, ran up to Dad, and started doing heart massage. What if Dad doesn't help and Dad? I won't forgive myself for this. When the doctors arrived, my father's condition was really bad. He was taken to the hospital. My mother and I accompanied him and waited in the waiting room all evening. It was just painful. Finally, the doctor came out and said that Dad was in a coma, but without first aid, he wouldn't have survived at all. It's all thanks to Chuck. We were forbidden to stay the night there, so we came home. But we couldn't find Chuck and all his belongings were gone from his room. I understood that Chuck ran away. Everything collapsed in an instant. I felt terrible. I'm the reason my dad's in the hospital. Why did I turn in Chuck? My parents were so attached to him. They were happy when he lived with us. And now we need to find Chuck and apologize. Mom suggested we go to the orphan home together. What if he went back there? The next day, she baked Chuck a pie and went there. But the caretaker said Chuck never came back. We were very upset and were about to leave when suddenly I heard the orphans' conversation. All their squad was going to the nightclub this night. Chuck's probably there. We went to that nightclub and struggled through the crowd. Looking around, here he is. Chuck tried to run away again, but I stopped him and forced myself to say, "It was hard for me to accept how much you've changed. I don't know what's between us right now, but my family needs you." Chuck hesitated. But then Mom came over and handed him a piece of pie. "You must be hungry." Then Chuck looked confused and stared at the floor. He didn't know what to say. His freaky parents, standing around, stared at us in disbelief. Finally, Chuck looked up, smiled and said, "Your home is the best food in the world." We laughed and hugged. Seems like he really has become a part of our family. We left the nightclub and then we got a call from the hospital. They said my father has emerged from coma. We rushed there and ran into his room. Thank God, Dad is fine. Mom and I rushed to hug him, and only Chuck was left standing awkwardly in the corner. Then Dad noticed him and called him over. "Thank you," he softly said to Chuck and tightly hugged him. We all returned home together. I thought my father would hate me after my scam, but we ended up being more careful of each other. I apologized and stopped arguing with him. and Dad realized that he was strict with me. Chuck got along well with Dad and actually even shared his interests. Parents no longer worried that their foster son was a freak. They thought Chuck was a good person and didn't mind us dating. The only thing we still have to decide is, who are we to each other? I was walking on a tightrope at a height of 10 meters. The audience held its breath. A blind gymnast under the very dome of the circus performed the trick without a net. I did a somersault, but the lenses made it hard to see. I almost fell down. The audience burst into applause. Back in the dressing room, I rushed to the mirror to get those stupid white lenses off. Everyone thought I was blind, but that was a lie. My father was a circus director, and he thought that for the sake of a blind gymnast, the audience was willing to pay 3 times more. Ever since my mom died, he had gone off the rails and made me pretend to be blind. I wanted to study at the circus school and become a world star. My father made a condition. If I wanted to leave, I had to earn $100,000 and give it to him, then I would be free. But such a sum was simply unrealistic for me. Dad was waiting for me in the dressing room. He shook the bills and menacingly said that the audience was not enough, all because I did not smile at anyone. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. I barely had time to put on my sunglasses. A tall, curly-haired guy stood in the doorway. He was so beautiful that I was even taken aback. The guy introduced himself as Ed and said with a bored look that he worked for a foundation to help the blind. They had a grant, and now they were choosing who the fund would allocate money for site restoration, about $100,000. I didn't understand anything, but my father suddenly jumped up to Ed and began to shake his hand, repeating that we agreed to everything. And he added that Ed should definitely come to us for breakfast the next morning. I was taken aback, and so was Ed apparently, but he said he would come. As soon as Ed left, my father said sharply that I had to get this grant at any cost. But on the other hand, I finally had a chance. Maybe because of this, I could get closer to my dream. The next morning, Ed came to our house. Over tea, he lazily said that there were several candidates for the grant, especially since scammers often wanted to get the money. So he would ask me a few questions about my illness. My father glared at me, and I quickly agreed. He felt the tension and suggested that we go to the park next to the house. On the way, Ed read everything from a piece of paper. Not really listening to me, I tried to keep it interesting, to charm him. But the next question was, what's your relationship with your mom? A lump rose in my throat. Is something wrong? Asked Ed. I gathered my thoughts and told him. My mother was a gymnast, but she failed during a performance. Then I promised myself that I would become a star and conquer the world in memory of my mother. At that moment, a guy rushed by, throwing mud at me. This isn't a bike lane. Ed froze and asked me how I knew a bike had passed us. Damn it. I lied that my hearing had improved after losing my sight. The way Ed looked at me. What if he realized I was lying? Then my alarm went off. I had to run to practice. I had to work hard if I wanted to be a star. Suddenly, Ed said that he would go with me. He would make a video for the foundation with my training. I was very surprised, but I agreed. Surely this would help me get a grant. I was very worried because in training, I did not pretend to be blind. But right now, I needed to be very careful. Under the dome of the circus, I did the most daring acrobatic tricks. And Ed looked at me with admiration for the entire 3 hours. In the evening, as soon as I went home, my father immediately bombarded me with questions. Did you get the money? When I told him everything, he suddenly shouted that I was stupid. I must have given myself away. I was hurt so bad. Dad, I'm trying my best. In tears, I ran to my room. The next morning, my father burst into my room without knocking. He told me to get ready right away. Ed was waiting for me downstairs. My father wouldn't let me miss a second chance. As soon as I came down, Ed immediately said that he was impressed with my perseverance and added that training was training. But sometimes I needed to relax, and he decided to take me to the ocean. I couldn't believe it. It was only a 3-hour drive to the ocean, but my dad never took me there. On the way, Ed started talking. Turned out that he grew up in an orphanage, but as soon as he graduated, he immediately rushed to explore the world. Even now, he was saving up for a trip around the world, which was why he worked part-time at the foundation. I thought about it, and I had never been farther than our town. I spent all my free time training. We pulled up the gas station, and Ed went to pay for the gas. And then I saw something in the glove compartment of his car. Could it be a real police badge? Hell, if Ed was a cop and he had been trying to check on me all this time, then soon everyone would know about my deception. My father and I would end up in jail. I heard Ed approaching the car and slammed the glove compartment shut. The main thing was to behave as if nothing had happened. We sat in silence by the ocean. I was afraid to say anything, and Ed looked thoughtfully into the distance. Suddenly he asked, when I swam in the pool the last time. Why this question? Then Ed suddenly took my hand and started dragging me into the water. I didn't want to. I would get wet, but he said it would do me good. He was here and nothing would happen to me. We jumped in the waves and Ed didn't let go of my hand. For the first time in many years, I had so much fun. When we got ashore, Ed got a call. He hung up the phone and said in a drooping voice that the foundation had refused me the money for the surgery. I was silent, and the tears came to my eyes. But why? Ed began to reassure me. I think the money was given to some kid. But he said that he was amazed at my persistence and was sure that I was worthy of the surgery. He was sorry the foundation didn't have another grant for me. I returned home, not knowing how to tell my father. It was dark in the room when I noticed my dad. He was sitting in a chair and glaring at me. I burst into tears. Dad, the foundation refused to help me. My father was very angry and shouted that if I missed the grant, I would pretend to be blind for the rest of my life and clean the elephant enclosures in the evenings. No more gymnastics. I was taken aback. Dad, why are you doing this to me? All night I clenched my fists in frustration. What should I do? My father would never let me go without money, and I was not going to give up on my dream. In desperation, I dialed Ed. He quickly picked up the phone and said that he was going to call himself. It was so strange, but I immediately blurted out that I needed help. We need to meet urgently. Ed was silent, but suddenly he said that he would come to me in an hour. A car honked outside the window. I slipped past my father's bedroom and out into the courtyard. I sat down and Ed said we weren't going to talk here. I needed to calm down. We arrived at some building. It was a road restaurant. Then we went inside and sat down at one of the tables. Ed immediately ordered tea for me. God, how was I going to tell him everything? It was terrible, but I had to admit that no one but Ed could save me. Just when I worked up the courage to speak up, Ed interrupted me. He handed me the money and said that he had collected it for a trip around the world. Ed added that it would be enough to live the life I really wanted. What do you mean, Ed? And then I heard a bell behind me. What's going on? I saw my father in the doorway. Not again. He was getting closer, and I was already preparing for the worst. Then my father stopped. I realized that he had noticed the money on the table. My father snatched the bills and told me I had to go home right away. I didn't have time to say anything, and Ed looked dumbfounded. In the car, Dad was counting the money, but suddenly he said that he had changed his mind about letting me go. After all, the image of a blind circus girl could bring him a lot of money, and the maintenance of the circus was very expensive. Outraged, I didn't know what to say. My blood boiled. Dad, you can't do this to me. But Dad said sharply that I didn't dare to contradict him. I was still a child, and I would work in the circus for as long as he said. Tears welled up in my eyes from the hurt. My dream was ruined, but the worst part was that I cheated on Ed, the only person who treated me with kindness. I had to give him the money back, and then run away from my dad, the circus, and everything that had been dragging me down for so many years. In the morning, I heard my dad slam the door. I was home alone. I immediately jumped out of bed and went to his office, to the safe. My hands were shaking. Carefully, I began to sort through the codes. Father's date of birth, a failure. So, what about my mom's? Another failure. Damn, if it doesn't work now, the alarm will go off. I gathered my strength and entered my year of birth. And wow, it worked. Carefully, I took the money. And then the lock clicked at the bottom. My father was back. I barely managed to hide the money in my suit bag. My father shouted to me from below that it was time to leave. They were already waiting for us at the circus. I was trembling with excitement. I had never gone against my father before. I was going to run away right after the performance. And finally, my performance was announced. But when I got on stage, I noticed Ed in the back row. What was he doing here? He looked me straight in the eye. I stopped for a second and then continued walking towards the rope. But at that moment, I remembered his phrase. You can live as you want. Then I turned around and went to the microphone. And then I took off my white lenses. The hall hummed in shock. I apologized and said I couldn't live in deception anymore. All this time, I was just pretending to be blind. But recently I met someone who showed me that we really decided how we lived. I looked at Ed. Then my furious dad ran out into the arena and began to shout and swear. He was already running up to me. My stomach clenched. I didn't know what to do, but suddenly the police burst into the hall. God, I'm about to get arrested for fraud. But the cops were on their way to my dad. And then one of them snapped the handcuffs on his hands. What's going on? Ed ran up to me, and I was confused and begged his forgiveness. I added that I was surprised he hadn't brought me to the station himself. Ed didn't know what I was talking about. I know you're a cop, Ed. I saw the badge in the glove compartment. Suddenly, Ed laughed. He said it was a fake. He was playing a prank on a friend once. I couldn't believe it, and then Ed added that he'd figured it out a long time ago, but he was waiting for me to tell him, and after my confession he realized that he was not mistaken in me, and he invited me to go around the world with him. After all, it seemed that my father would no longer be able to hold me hostage. I'm telling the story on the shore of the Pacific Ocean. Ed and I have already traveled to 50 countries, and this morning, I got a letter from the circus school. I got in. I hope now I can perform that difficult trick. And with it, I can become a world star in memory of my mother. I woke up with a strong hunger and chills and with difficulty went to the kitchen. The refrigerator was empty, so my parents didn't have any money again. I was wondering where I could get food, and then I remembered the cellar. My mom used to keep canned food there. Going down to the basement, I caught my foot on the cans. It was strange. We never had such supplies. I turned on the light and couldn't believe my eyes. From floor to ceiling, the basement was filled with glass jars of money. Where were they from? I saw on the news yesterday that the police found a similar stash in the possession of a mobster. I would never have thought that of my mom, but my dad. Was he involved in something? My dad used to be very secretive, but lately he had completely stopped communicating with me and my mom. Not long ago, I saw him arguing with someone on the phone, and when my dad noticed me, he got very angry and slammed the door in my face. Did my dad get involved with the mafia? I pushed the bad thoughts away. He was not like that. Dad took care of me. He even got a second job so that I could buy some medicine. I had a congenital heart defect and it only got worse every day. Suddenly, the front door slammed upstairs, and I heard my mom's voice. I quickly went upstairs and immediately asked, "Where's so much money in our basement from?" But my mom was noticeably nervous and quickly told me not to touch anything there and go to bed. I was still too weak. It all sounded fake. Mom, are you and Dad hiding something from me? But she only said that she had a lot of problems, and she promised to find out about those jars with money from my dad today. And that I must have imagined it. When my mom and I had dinner in the evening, I was on pins and needles, and after eating and taking the obligatory pills, my head began to split. My mom took me upstairs, and as soon as I lay down, I fell into a deep sleep. In the morning, I was awakened by voices. My parents were arguing loudly in the kitchen. My ears were ringing, but I managed to get there. When my parents saw me in the doorway, they fell silent. My dad said they had something to tell. There was indeed a huge money of money stored in our basement, but whose money was it? It turned out that our neighbor Jack had brought the jars to the basement. Apparently, he was a fraud and dragged my parents into his scam to hide his stolen money from the authorities. But that's a crime! Did my parents not think about the fact that they could be put away? Suddenly, my mom started crying and said it was for me. Jack paid them for the basement, and thanks to him, we could buy medicine. I was ashamed that I had suspected my dad. My parents were trying their best to help me, but I didn't want them to end up behind jars because of me. I didn't want us all to end up in jail, so I decided to talk to Jack myself. I would go and tell Jack to get his damn money quickly. But if he didn't do that, I would go to the police. Mom said I was too excited and made me take my medicine again. Otherwise, I might have an episode. I dutifully drank the pills, and when my parents left on business, I immediately went to the neighbor. I went to his house and looked in the window. Jack had brought the gym bag into the kitchen, in which something rattled. The jars! That scoundrel hadn't moved everything to our basement yet? My head was spinning with anger, and I stepped back and brushed against the rake by the window. They fell with a crash. I hoped Jack didn't hear me. I looked out the window again, but there was no one in the kitchen. And then, behind me, I heard, "What are you doing here?" It was Jack. He held a huge shovel in his hands. It was too late to retreat, so I blurted out that I would turn Jack into the police. Let him leave my parents alone immediately. He said in amazement that he didn't know what I was talking about. Then he took the candy out of his pocket and handed it to me. "Here, it seems they are your favorite." Favorite? I had never eaten candy in my life. Maybe he wanted to poison me. Terrified, I backed away and ran with great effort toward the house. But Jack didn't follow me. What would that mean? At the fence, I ran into my mom. She was busy in the garden and immediately asked what happened. I shouted that Jack was dangerous and I needed to call the police right away. But Mom said she had no idea what I was talking about. What? We were just talking about money this morning. My mother looked at me with incomprehension. We were poor. We never had any money. What did she mean? I grabbed my mom's hand and dragged her down to the basement to show her the money. Inside, I could barely find a light switch. The light bulb sparked for a long time, and when it finally lit up, the basement was empty. But how? My mom looked at me sadly. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Someone was coming towards us. It was Jack. He was getting close. The door swung open, and I saw my dad standing in the doorway. He asked me why I was in the basement again. I explained vaguely about the jars, but my dad said I was hallucinating from the new pills. And that I urgently needed to see a doctor. What? Dad, you said it was our neighbor's money. Mom, why aren't you talking? She gently took my arm and pushed me toward the exit. No, what do you want to do with me? I'm not going. Did Jack frighten my parents enough to send me to an asylum just to keep my secret? We needed to get out and run to the police. I would turn Jack into the authorities, and I would make sure my parents didn't go to jail. I ran for the door, but my dad grabbed me tightly. Let me go! I pushed him away and tried to run outside, but my mom had already blocked the front door. I needed another way. Then I ran as fast as I could to my room. Dad's footsteps could be heard somewhere below. As soon as I was in my room, I snapped the lock in one motion and rushed to the window. But if I jumped, I might lose consciousness immediately because of my weakness. I was thinking of another way to escape. But suddenly my dad jerked the doorknob and asked me softly why I had closed it. I didn't say anything. Then I heard loud bangs. They decided to break down the door. There was no way out. I climbed onto the windowsill, squeezed my eyes shut, and took a step. I landed badly. I think I hurt my ankle, but I had to hurry. Even if my parents were covering Jack, only I could tell the truth and save them. Running was heartbreaking. My vision blurred, but then I saw the police station ahead. Just a little bit left. Suddenly I heard the roar of an engine. My parents, they're after me. I kept running, trying not to look back. Then the noise of the engine stopped. What happened? At that moment, I was grabbed and dragged back. "Where are you going, daughter?" said the voice in my ear. I tried to pull away, but my strength was gone, and my parents forced me into the car. The locks on the door snapped shut. My mom held me tight all the way, and as we drove up to the house, I saw Jack in the window. He was watering the lawn near the property and stole a glance at me. I think he knew I wanted to turn him to the police. As soon as we arrived, Dad threw me into the basement and locked me in. He said it was all for my own good. I was trembling, and I tried to climb the ladder, but I didn't have the strength. And then I heard a strange voice behind the wall. I was literally paralyzed with horror. What did they want to do to me? Suddenly, several bricks popped out of the wall with a bang, and a face appeared in the opening. It was Jack. He got to me first. Now I was dead for sure. I felt like I was going to faint. I could barely stand. "Come here, don't be afraid," Jack said softly. Well, no. Then Jack reached into his pocket for something. My heart sank, but suddenly he handed me a piece of candy and said that the sweetness would certainly make me feel better. Those candies again? Jack suddenly asked if my parents had passed me candy from him. No, of course. We ate vegetables all our lives. He was very surprised, said that he had long thought the behavior of my parents was suspicious. As we drove past, he noticed my tear-stained face. And then he heard a noise in the basement. Jack knew that our houses were connected by an underground passageway, so he decided to find out what was going on. Suddenly, I heard the basement door open. It was Dad. After a moment's hesitation, Jack said that we had to run as fast as possible. We barely managed to squeeze into the narrow opening. I was too weak and Jack scooped me up in his arms. From the stale air, my head was getting blurry and I blacked out. The last thing I remembered was a thin line of light ahead. I woke up at Jack's house. Turned out he had already called the police. Mom and Dad were detained and taken to the police station. Who would have thought it would end like this? After that, a long trial began, and I did not understand what was happening. And finally, at the final meeting, I learned the truth. It turned out that all this time, my parents gave me sugar pills, not drugs, so it got worse and worse. And the money that Mom and Dad received from charity funds, they saved it for themselves and hid in the basement. Jack really had nothing to do with it. The police never found those jars of pills. But it wasn't them that bothered me. It was the fact that my closest people were using me to get rich. I couldn't believe it. As a result, my parents were put away for 10 years and I was going to be sent to an orphanage. The doctor also said that I did not have long to live because the funds could not allocate more money for treatment. Life was falling apart right before my eyes. But to my surprise, Jack decided to take custody of me, and as soon as the documents were ready, in gratitude, I decided to prepare a festive dinner for my parents' zucchini. I may not live a long life, but in the time that remains, I would very much like to repay the kindness of the man who saved me. I barely made it to my parents' garden, and Jack saw me there. He immediately rushed to help me, saying that I needed to conserve my strength. We were cutting zucchini when we saw a piece of glass under one of the bushes. What was it? Jack quickly began to dig up the flower bed, and a minute later, he was holding a jar filled to the brim with pills. Soon we dug up a dozen more of the same. I couldn't believe my eyes. This amount was enough not only for pills, but also for surgery for me. I could recover completely. My head was spinning again, but this time from happiness. The phone vibrated. It was Kaya, my sister. She was panicking, saying something about her boyfriend, a bed, some kind of basement. She begged to be saved, but then the connection was abruptly cut off. What? Again? My sister was always playing pranks, which made me mad. I always rushed to the rescue, but time after time, I only ran into my sister's pranks. I won't be fooled this time. I called her back, but she didn't pick up. I called her 100 times. What if it was serious this time? Kai was so convincing. But if it was a hoax again, I would just destroy her. I was going to look for her, but as I passed her room, I noticed an open laptop on the table. There was her conversation with Mitch on the screen. Oh no, did they get back together? He wrote that he was expecting her at his house today and sent her the address. Here you are, sister. 20 minutes later, I was at his house. I knocked and the door opened at the same moment. What if it was part of a prank after all? I told him I'd come for my sister, but Mitch hesitated and said he hadn't seen her in 2 days. It was kind of suspicious. I was worried. Noticing this, Mitch suggested that we look for her together. He called me inside and asked me to wait while he changed. Mitch lived in a cool house with a stylish renovation. There was a studio room on the first floor. I sat down on the bed and looked around. There were posters of athletes, a video game console, pictures of Mitch with some kids. Nothing special, just a strange handle sticking out of the wall. And then I noticed Kaya's bag. Well then, it was definitely a joke. Sister, you can't fool me this time. I needed to play along with Mitch. When he came back, I told him I should probably call cops in case my sister was in danger. I already got my phone out. Suddenly, Mitch asked me if my heart was telling me something. After all, we were sisters and we should have some kind of intuitive connection. Are you kidding me? But I played along and replied that I felt like she was somewhere close. Mitch smiled strangely and said I was right. He jerked a handle on the wall. The bed beneath me parted and I fell down. What was going on? I fell somewhere and hurt myself. What was this place? Then with an effort, I got up and saw Kaya. She was trembling all over. Quite natural. But it was time to end this unfortunate joke. I shook myself off and gloated that I knew that this was just another stupid prank of hers. And I was already calling the police. But where was the phone? Looks like he stayed there. Heck. Kaya started shouting that I was a stupid fool. This wasn't a prank. She and Mitch had been fighting for the past month, and all of a sudden, he'd invited her over. Kaya thought it was an olive branch, but he suddenly pushed her into the basement, and she had been sitting here for 10 hours. It seemed strange to me. But there was one thing I was sure of. Kaya always picks out some assholes. And this one infuriated me especially. Once he even tried to conduct an educational conversation so that my sister and I would be kinder to each other. Mitch really annoyed me. He was weird. Time passed, but Mitch couldn't even be heard. Kaya suddenly started crying and I felt uneasy. Hey, you're actually the eldest. Do you have any ideas on how to get out? Clear. So it was all on me again. I decided to look around. The light came from a small window near the ceiling. I could see that there was nothing in the basement but an old table and a door. I began to study the door. There was a similar lock in my room, which Kaya always unlocked with ease. I hated it, but it might save us now. Kaya perked up a little, took out a hairpin, and inserted it into the lock, but it immediately bent. How can you be so clumsy? I tried to figure out what to do, but Kaya made it difficult to think, tapping her foot nervously. And then I had an idea. I asked Kaya to take off her shoes with the massive heel and tried to knock out the lock with them. My sister watched in silence and was not going to help. She said that she was very sick. Never mind, we'll get out and then I'll show her sick. It went on for more than an hour. I knocked as hard as I could. I couldn't do anything. I sat down against the wall and cried softly. Suddenly, Kaya jumped up and said I was right. It was all hoax. But she was tired of being stuck here, and she had had enough fun watching me to try to get out. She's a real head case. Only a psychopath could think of such a thing. Kaya screamed for Mitch to open the door. It was all over. There was silence upstairs. She started yelling at the top of her lungs and banging on the door, but Mitch still didn't come to the rescue. Suddenly, footsteps sounded from above. I already wanted to get out and stop talking to this idiot forever. And then we heard the sound of a chainsaw. Kaya was in panic, and I was annoyed by this prolonged joke. What's the use of a practical joke if you already know about it? Kaya yelled for Mitch to open up. The jokes were over. Duh. An actress. How much longer? But Kaya was sobbing in fright, repeating that it shouldn't be like this. That Mitch should have opened the door after her signal. Yeah, go on with you. Kaya became hysterical. I think I've only seen her like this once in my life, when our dad... Suddenly, smoke began to pour out from under the door. What kind of special effects are these? I shifted my gaze to Kaya and felt a growing sense of unease. Kaya took off her earring and tried to pick the lock with trembling hands. I could hear the wooden beams crackling from the fire, and I knew from the sound that the fire was reaching the basement. Burning up in a locked room was my worst nightmare. Well, even if it was a hoax, I'd rather be a naive fool again than have nothing left of us. I was even afraid to think that. I had to open the window immediately, but it was so high. Kaya offered to move the table, but it was too heavy. We tried to move it, and then Kaya started coughing heavily from the smoke. Bagel, I think I'm fading. She whispered. Bagel, that's what she called me when I was a kid. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid that she would fall, and I went to her, and Kaya hugged me. She didn't realize that Mitch was a real maniac. Kaya talked about how lonely she was after her father was hit by a car. Mom turned all her attention to me because I was the youngest, and Kaya was left alone with her pain. She always chose only strong guys, looking for support in them, and so ran into a psychopath. She also dragged me into it. Kaya coughed again. She was getting worse. I begged her to hold on just a little longer, but I knew there would be no miracle. My sister Vera quietly whispered that she loved me, and she was very sorry for what had happened. It's been so long since she said anything like that to me. Why now, when we were about to die? I replied through my tears that I loved her too. The door opened and Mitch came in, looking pleased. His smile faded when he saw Kaya lying on my lap, almost unconscious. He picked her up and carried her out of the basement. I understood nothing, but I followed him. When my sister caught her breath, Mitch said he was sorry, but now he had it all worked out. He managed to bring us together. It turned out that he was very upset by our quarrels because he was the older brother himself and knew how important peace was in the family. But after unsuccessful attempts to get through to us with conversations, he realized that he needed to act more radically, and he had a plan to intimidate us so that in an extreme situation, we would unite and make up. He thought it all out. The sound of burning wood and chainsaw was a recording, and the smoke was a smoke machine effect. Got what he wanted, my sister and I looked at each other and, without speaking, pushed him onto the bed, and Kaya lowered the lever. Now we're having tea in this kitchen, and I'm so glad I finally found a friend in my sister. Mitch's screams came from the basement, but they didn't bother us at all. Let him sit there for a couple of hours. Let's think about it. I'm Jilly, the popular TikToker. I already have 3 million followers and I'm used to constant marks from them. But on this day, they went crazy. They sent me tons of videos of some village girl. Are you kidding me? This is an account with knitting lessons. But when I saw the blogger in that video, I was blown away. She was my exact copy. I, of course, was often copied, but this time the girl was just the splitting image of me. I don't believe in miracles since childhood, but she even had the same voice. I was shocked, but then I thought it would be fun to shoot a video with her. This would definitely fall into the trends. The girl's name was Meg. I texted her and asked her to meet me at the cafe tomorrow. Oddly, she agreed very quickly. What if this was some kind of setup? The next morning, I pulled my hood up so the fans wouldn't recognize me and went to the meeting. To be honest, for a year I was already pretty exhausted from filming all sorts of events, and this increased attention. I was considered the most scandalous star of TikTok, but I made good money, true. I was very lonely. Because of my popularity, I did not have any real friends at all, and sometimes I wanted to become just an ordinary person again, who did not need to check likes and views every 5 minutes, and be afraid that I would be photographed from an unsuccessful angle. Constantly looking around, I went into the cafe. I was uneasy and felt like this was some kind of prank. But then I saw Meg at the Comer table. Wow. She really looked a lot like me. Meg waved at me. But when I got closer, I saw that she had a different shape of the nose and a bunch of moles on her neck. Meg immediately said that she admired me and how quickly I was gaining an audience. She had long wanted to pump up in blogging and be as cool as I was. You know, Meg, popularity is cool. But being a blogger isn't as easy as it sounds. And then I came up with something. What if Meg and I switched places? She would replace me for my fans, and I could finally live a peaceful life. I made up my mind and told Meg about it, but she hesitated and said that she could not do the same cool TikToks, and the subscribers would see us right away. Come on, it'll work. You will only visit different fashionable parties. I'll even pay for it. What's there to think about? Meg was silent and then quietly said that she agreed because she really needed money right now. I was so happy. My copy would work for me. Cool. All I had to do was change Meg's clothes. My copy had to look the part. So I took Meg shopping. I had to pick up some glamorous looks. The copy was so confused that she didn't even object. At the store, I told her that her first assignment was waiting for her tonight. She needed to go to the next star party in the mansion, sign a few autographs, smile, and that's all. I was sick of them already. Soon, Meg looked like a real celebrity. I I quickly put her in a taxi, and then I went home. For the first time in a long time, I was going to enjoy a quiet evening in my apartment. But no such luck. Meg was tagged in a bunch of photos. From the first comment, I almost went crazy. The follower wrote that Meg was replaced today. The comment was liked by 500 people. I read on intently. Jilly's nice today. She hasn't been rude to anyone tonight, and hundreds more of the same. When Meg finally returned, I immediately ran into her and asked her why she was being so nice. But all Meg could say was that she was absolutely delighted with this life. At the party, she was even offered to become the face of a cosmetics brand and took a few photos. What? Meg? Are you crazy? You have moles all over your neck, and I don't have any. Followers will immediately guess everything. I immediately deleted all my photos from Instagram with an open neck and posted a picture of Meg. Let the followers think that I have always had moles. The next morning, followers continued to admire me at yesterday's party and liked a new photo. The plan with my copy still worked. I could finally get some rest. But it was not so easy. I always had to be on the lookout. I might have been recognized while Meg was hanging out in another part of town. I went to a movie once and just put on my 3D glasses, as I was accosted by two chicks. They were asking how Jilly had ended up in the movie theater when she'd posted the story from the spot 5 minutes ago. I told them that they had got it all wrong and quickly ran away through the emergency exit. The fans looked after me suspiciously. After that, I was afraid to go out and I spent most of my time at home. I didn't want anyone to recognize me again. But after 2 weeks of such rest, I was terribly bored. I usually dealt with this by one means. I arranged a live in TikTok. I prepared myself. I put on a new tight dress and turned on the stream. The mood was just cool. But suddenly a wave of hate hit me. I didn't understand what was going on, but followers began to write that I was somehow evil and that I looked fat in a dress. Some jerk wrote that he saw me at the party yesterday. I was much kinder and more beautiful. In a panic, I cut off the live. It's just me. You've always liked my sarcasm. After the live, 1,000 people unsubscribed from me. What a thrash! Is Sweet Meg doing any better? I'm sure you'll soon get tired of her too. I called Meg and told her it was force majeure. Meg had to come and do the next live right away. I didn't think she could do any better than I could. But at least I wouldn't have to listen to all of this hate. Meg asked for my TikTok password, just in case if she would need to make an extraordinary live. Reluctantly, I handed her the information. Okay, I would change my password in a week when my fans want me back. Every night, Meg did her live and I watched the stream. The audience was growing and I couldn't understand why it was happening. Fans, are you blind? I had to do something, so on the eve of the next live, I handed her an idiotic second-hand dress. She would definitely not be able to be a princess. I was looking forward to the wave of hate, but all of a sudden, Meg was showered with compliments, like, in this simple dress, she's even better. She finally stopped looking like a doll. The mood was ruined, but in the evening, I got a call from the courier. He had a gift for me, from a fan. Well, finally at least someone had come to their senses. I had just pulled a brand new smartphone out of the box when Meg burst into the living room, snatched it out of my hands, and said it was for her. What's the matter? Meg said that she had been hanging out with my ex, a cool rapper, for a couple of weeks now, and he was sending her presents. I didn't believe it. Then Meg showed a picture of her hugging him, where she gave the fans the finger. This was my signature gesture. It was simply unbearable. I freaked out, telling her to get out of my life. I didn't need her services anymore. Meg looked at me quizzically and said that brainless dolls like me were not worthy of fame. She always knew she could be better than me, and she proved it with ease. I was just taken aback by her impudence and could not even object, and Meg walked away triumphantly. I only understood one thing. I should have told the fans the whole truth sooner. I quickly made a video with a bare neck and was going to post it on TikTok. See? The real Jilly doesn't have any moles. I already came up with a caustic comment to the photo. as I realized that I couldn't log into my account. What's going on? The password didn't fit. I texted Meg and asked for my account back, but she sent me a mocking smile in response. That was the last straw. How dare she? It's me, Jilly, not she. And then the bell rang. Meg has finally come to her senses, but the voice on the phone only politely reminded me not to be late for the presentation of the Blogger of the Year award. It started today at 6. Was this some scam? This was the first time I had heard of it, but they said they had already called me exactly a week ago. Then it hit me. Meg was aware and wanted to collect the award herself. I hung up to the phone and frantically searched for a dress. I needed to get ahead of this tinker. Barely made it to the start of the award. I rushed to the dressing room. But when I opened the door, Meg was already inside, sitting in my chair. I expected any reaction, but Meg suddenly burst into tears and begged me not to expose her. She promised that she would no longer go behind my back and would obey me in everything. Meg was suddenly that sweet little girl, and for a second, I felt sorry for her. I went over to Meg to calm her down, but suddenly she grabbed my arm. What the hell was going on? I tried to pull away, but Meg wouldn't let go. She said that it was only because of her that I was nominated at all. After that, Meg dragged me to the bathroom. What are you doing? But she quickly went out and locked the door. Hey, let me out! I tried the handle for a long time, but it was useless. What should I do? I started looking for something to pick the lock with, and then I remembered my hair. It was full of hairpins. I ran to the door and began poking at the lock with my bobby pin. And finally I heard it click. I ran as fast as I could down the long corridor to the stage, but Meg was already standing there. All the searchlights pointed at her. I ran out on stage and waited for the fans to be happy. But the audience was buzzing, demanding that I wouldn't disturb Jilly in her speech. So they thought I was a fake. Meg said into the microphone that I was just crazy and needed to be isolated. The guards were already running to the stage. And then someone from the audience shouted that in fact, the real Jilly never had ugly moles on her neck until recently. I realized this was my chance. And they shouted that there were no moles on my old Instagram photos. Let them see for themselves. Damn it. I removed them with my own hands. The guards dragged me off the stage. I resisted, shouting that they were wrong. A minute later, I was in the ambulance. The doctor gave me an injection for some reason. Gradually, my eyes began to close. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized one thing bitterly. Life is one and you need to live it on your own. In order not to turn out to be your own fake at one point,